It's that word we're all sick of hearing, lockdown.
You must stay at home.
No socialising, no adventures, and fishing under multiple restrictions. But rather than moan about it, we're bringing you this series to keep you going through these troublesome times. I'm Alan Blair, and these are the Lockdown Lives. When the first lockdown hit, I undertook daily Instagram live streams, but once they were done, 24 hours later, they were gone forever. I was inundated with messages from people who had missed them, they had questions to ask, and they wanted to hear them again. So whether you've got questions about bait, want to hear me rant about what's right or wrong with fishing, FAQs, fishing in the upper layers, and plenty more, I hope this series will help answer some of your questions and potentially give you a little fishing fix during the most frustrating of times. These are the Lockdown Lives.
Hello everyone, hope you're good, hope you're safe, hope you're well. Lockdown, brilliant! If you're anything like me, you're probably absolutely itching to get out there and do some fishing. It is somewhat difficult at the moment, so let's stay at home, let's stay safe. Let's have a chat. Let's have a chat about fishing. I'm going to kick off this lockdown series with a topic that I've titled What Counts? But before we get specifically into that, I'm going to have a think about why I, and maybe why you, go fishing in the first place. Why do you do it? You know, for me, I've been fishing my entire life. I absolutely love it. But a lot of people from the outside looking in maybe presume that fishing is a very boring thing. You sit around just watching a float, not doing very much. I think you people watching this probably know it's anything but that. You know, we're out there having an adventure. We've got lots of freedom, we're exploring, we're with friends. Fishing can be really quite exciting and exhilarating. Yeah, it's packed with highs and lows. Some people go because they just love the sunrises or the sunsets. Maybe it's the opportunity to see incredible wildlife, grebes or kingfishers, badgers, foxes. Fishing really does have so much to offer. It can take you away from the real world, from reality, from a busy job, possibly away from the wife or the girlfriend, to just get some you time on the bank. Maybe you love it because of the technicalities involved in it, you know, working out the pieces of the jigsaw, cracking a problem on a particular water. Maybe it's the bite, you know, whenever that bobbin just starts creeping up or the siren goes into full meltdown. Maybe you're stalking or float fishing and you're watching them take the bait. There are so many reasons why we as anglers choose to go and spend, in some instances, phenomenal amounts of time outside fishing. I think there's one underlying reason though that, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, disagree, but I think as fisher people, we all want to turn around and say, we caught one this big, you know, and that's a really important part of fishing. I'd never go home, go back to work, go down the pub and see my mates and get my phone out and show them a little gudgeon and them go, whoa, look at that. But if you get back from a fishing session and you show, particularly a non-angler, a photo of a big, massive carp, 9 times out of 10, they go, wow, that's incredible. And for that reason, out of all the species of fish I've ever fished for, the one that I love the most, the one I love to go out and try and catch, it is the carp. You know, it offers so many different ways of angling for it in different environments and situations, and they're really, really unique. I always think that, you know, you catch 100 barbel, they all look quite similar, 100 roach, they all look quite similar, but carp, they really are so unique. And most importantly, they grow absolutely massive. But in carp fishing, there is a big stigma. I'll go as far as saying it's a potential issue and a problem, and that is, does my carp count or not? You know, you'll hear a lot of people say to you, that don't count, that one don't count, that's a wrong un. What is a wrong un, you know? Or to look at it another way, what is a proper one, you know? Who calls that shot? Who makes those decisions? The term wrong un, I've used it myself in carp fishing, you know, I hold my hands up. I've also used the term, that's a proper one. But what does it really mean, you know? Because I don't think I truly know. Taking it out of the context of fishing, bless him, love him to bits, absolute salt of the earth. But I'll often say Gary Bayes, he's a proper wrong 'un, you know. Some of the things I've seen Gary do over the years, coming into the office 2 or 3 days later, drinking a cold cup of coffee without a care in the world, I often look at him and think, you wrong 'un, Gary. But how can you relate it back to fishing? You know, there doesn't seem to be any black and white to what is a wrong and what is a right one. Not like you've got 2 + 2 = 4, you know, it's a much more grey area. Are the issues the fish are too fat, they're too thin, they're too long, they're too skinny, they're too pale, that one's a bit too golden, that one's really dark, yeah, that one definitely counts, that's a nice dark one. Maybe their barbules are too long, their mouth isn't overslung enough, their head's not sloping enough, their tail's too pointy, or it's not round and heart-shaped enough. Their shoulders are too big, they haven't got enough scales. The list goes on, you know. What deems a carp a right one, or in this case, a wrong one? I've caught lots of different carp, shapes and sizes from all over the place. You know, none more so than, you know, the fish I caught from the Gomera when I went with Kev. I look at those carp, and to me, they're really, really special. They were very, very dark, big pecs, beautiful mouths. But where did they come from, you know? The research that Kev and I did about those fish from the Gomera, we understand that they were sort of stocked on those islands, the Canary Islands, to try and eradicate or keep down the mosquito population. But where did they come from before that? So is it a case of that we should be looking at the origin of the carp to deem whether they're a right one or a wrong one? I'm certainly no historian, and to be fair, I'm not really that interested. I've never read up too much on the history of the carp I'm fishing for. It's just not something that particularly floats my boat. You know, I'm more of a right here, right now. If I want to catch that carp, I want to catch it and enjoy the moment. And the same kind of goes with my family. Yeah, I'm a tad interested in my parents', you know, background, where they came from, and possibly a little tiny bit interested in my grandparents. But as I say, I'm more interested in now, right here, right now, in the future. Possibly, and touch wood, it won't happen, but in later life, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we're in another lockdown, there's another super virus tearing the world apart. At that point, I might sit down and invest some time into understanding my family tree better. But for me now, it's not really that interesting. And the same goes for my fish that I'm fishing for. Rightly or wrongly, I'm not too bothered about their origin. I just want to go out and enjoy catching them. Just for your information, my dad is actually Irish and my mother is actually from New Zealand. They moved to England and they had me and my brother and my sister. I've always thought I was British, but am I? Or am I a bit of a wrong 'un, you know, because of my, you know, parents and their background? Could you relate the same to carp, for example? If a carp was legally imported into Britain and then it had offspring in a lake here, would that make those carp British carp? I don't know, it's just all getting a little bit too close to the line, really, you know, almost racism. And I certainly was brought up in a very multicultural society with lots of friends of different races, and I bring my children up the same way. You know, we are absolutely all equal. It doesn't matter your race, but the same doesn't seem to apply within carp fishing. One of the classic ones would be simmos. If you've not heard of simmos before, they're a strain of fish, born and bred in Britain, fantastic fish farmer, Mark Simmons, big team, loads of ponds and stuff. But their reputation certainly in years gone by, it's not been fantastic. Horrible simmo, plain boring old simmo. And yeah, I've caught some simmos that have been pretty boring and pretty plain, but I've also caught some that are absolutely out of hand. They blow your mind, you know, really beautiful scaly fish. We've stocked a lot into the lakes here at Nash, and a lot of people, they catch these fish and they have absolutely no idea that they've come from that sort of Mark Simmons simmo strain. They just look at them and go, wow, what an incredible fish. Occasionally, if I'm in their company, I'll point out that's actually a simmo. And they kind of look at you like, no, of course it's not. I said, it is, you know. People are often too quick to judge. And An even worse one would be the RH fish, Rob House's fish, places like the Monument and stuff. And then you've got the home fen fish. They've got, in certain people's eyes, a really bad reputation and stuff. Now, I've not ever actually been to home fen, so I can't comment, but a lot of the boys that work here, they love going up there and having a session, catching some really, really big carp. Going back to the RH fish, talking specifically about big rig. Big rig, I don't know the full details, but a few years ago grew to a colossal weight, like enormous, exceeded the British record and some. And I think the first proper capture at this colossal weight was a lad called Tom. Tom caught the fish. He joined the lake. He'd previously fished a number of circuit waters across the country, very, very good angler. And he joined the venue and he ended up catching this fish called Big Rig at this huge weight. And there was uproar across social media, on websites, forums, in print and stuff, to the point where Tom was receiving death threats, you know, horrible stuff. People were posting things through his letterbox and stuff, all because one man caught a carp. And they totally ruined the moment for him. They made him want to stop fishing. I was very lucky to be able to spend a day in his company and go fishing with him. As I say, fantastic angler. And he told me some of this, and it was pretty horrific, to be fair, guys. Can you imagine just going fishing, catching a fish, and because of that particular carp or the origins of that carp or its background, all of a sudden you start receiving death threats? You know, it seems a tad, I take that back, it seems incredibly unkind, you know, but it happened. Again, going back to the RH fish, I can talk personally about this because Rob and Harry, they brought us down some fish. We got some fish from them, some of the big rig babies, and we stocked them into our stock pond. When they arrived, was I very impressed by these carp? Truthfully, no, I wasn't, you know. They weren't the beautiful carp that I like, you know, but at the end of the day, they were still carp. Anyway, we put these fish in there. They've been in the lake now for a couple of years, I think, and I have since caught some and moved some into the Copse Lake. And when I caught those fish on rod and line, I looked at them again, very much the same as when they were first stocked here, and thought, nah, don't really impress me that much, you know, weren't particularly that nice. However, a couple of years ago at Christmas, I took Chloe and the girls up to Weston Park, which is another one of Rob's incredible waters, fantastic venue. We did a couple of nights fishing there over the New Year's period, and I was very lucky to get a couple of bites. And ironically, the two carp I caught were young fish, they were stockies, and they came from exactly the same year class as those big rig babies. So basically, big rig babies came down to here, they were stocked into our stock pond. I really wasn't impressed by them. I go up to Weston Park and I catch exactly the same fish, same year class. Got a lovely photo of me and Fern, and you look at it, it's a proper little mini banger. You know, what the fuck? Talk about contradict yourself. You know, they're exactly the same carp, but they're just living in different environments. So whether something counts or not, is it more to do with maybe the environment that those fish are actually living in? Is it the environment that makes them count? Does putting a fish into a certain environment change its colours, make it more appealing, for example? In a similar way to, for example, if I take a selfie on my phone, I do a lot of selfie taking, but a lot of ladies and girls like to do this, they can whack a filter on it and it makes that image look a lot better. You know, the boys at work here, they use Lightroom, for example, for their photo post-production and stuff, and they can take an image, they can put it through Lightroom and they can make it just go ping and look incredible. Same image, same person, same carp, but can be made to look loads better. Another example I'll give you, this fish here, it was stocked from VS Fisheries, another fantastic fish farmer. We stocked it with a number of other carp, but this particular one went into our new lake on site at £13, around 4 years ago. I was very blessed that on Christmas Day this year, I caught that same fish at £36 2 ounces, you know, a colossal, phenomenal, you know, weight growth in that period of time. It's a mega carp, and I can't help but think if instead of putting that carp at £13 into the new lake, we'd put it into our stock pond, whether it would still look pretty pale and not that appealing, and whether it would have even really grown that much, you know. So maybe the environment does play a massive part in some of us deeming what does or doesn't count. And talking about this new lake and talking about this specific capture, you know, I was blown away on that morning. Kev come up to see me, got a lovely photo together. But how much does it count? No one's ever fished that lake before other than Ollie and I once at the end of the Eurobank 6 film. No one's ever fished it since. I'm the privileged one in a position where Kev allowed me to fish there. Does it count? Was I just in effect fishing a back garden pond, even though it's over 3 acres in size, choked with weed, really mature and stuff? Is privilege something that make a fish be deemed as it should count or it shouldn't? Going back to, you know, the likes of Big Rig, Captain Jack, those big carp that were submitted for British records, would you claim it if you caught one? Would you want to claim the British record for one of those fish? It's a tricky one. If I went to one of those two waters and I was the capture of that fish and it exceeded the existing British record weight, I caught it on a rod, with line, with a hook, all legitimately, I'd try and claim it. For sure I'd try and claim it. A lot of people will hate that fact, you know, because it's not fair, it's been forced in weight to grow this size. Maybe it was imported in at a very large weight in the first place. But in my eyes, it was in a lake in Britain, it was caught on rod and line, and it becomes the biggest carp to ever have been caught in Britain. So, in my opinion anyway, it should count as a new British record. What about you though? What would you do in that situation? Would you claim it? Again, talking of British records, let's take a very famous fish, two-tone. It was a British record for a number of years. I can say hand on heart that over the years, every time I saw photos of that fish, not once did I ever think, wow, look at that carp, I'd love to catch it. Quite the opposite, in fact. It never really appealed to me as a wow fish, you know. So from there, does size even matter, you know? You'll often hear people saying, if it's not 40, it don't count, or I'm not fishing there, I ain't even got any 40-pounders in it, you know, for example. Or it's not even one of the A team, it's just a stocky or a classic. And one that applies to me quite a lot is, that's just a shitter, you know. All Al does is catch singles and doubles from little muddy park lakes. But to me, they count, you know. I've caught a lot of small fish that have meant something to me, maybe because of the situation, the circumstances, how tricky it was to actually catch that fish. They meant something to me and they counted. Again, talking about weight, it can often bring so much disappointment. I'll see comments on our YouTube videos, you know, aimed at the likes of me or Ollie or Samir, for example. Why didn't you weigh it? Why don't you weigh anything? Sometimes I do, you know, sometimes I am intrigued to know the weight. Certainly if I caught a massive roach, I definitely want to know how big it was, or a big perch. But as of years have gone on, I'm less and less interested in how big the carp I catch are. And I think a lot of that boils down to some of the disappointments over the years. For example, lifting up a fish on the scales, it's a really nice carp. Maybe you caught it in winter, for example, and you lift it up and it's 29.15 and you're like, oh, it's not a 30-pounder. What does 1 or 2 ounces more even matter, you know? Does that discredit the capture anymore? Does that mean all of a sudden, because it was just under 30 pounds, it's not a meritorious fish or it shouldn't count? The whole PB thing is very, very interesting, because growing up all through my childhood, teenage years, and even into my sort of early 20s and stuff, as a carp angler, I was striving to hit certain milestones, you know. I really wanted to catch my first double-figure carp, and it meant so much to me when I did. Then after that, I really wanted to catch a 20-pounder, and it was years and years and years later before I caught that 20-pounder, and when I did, I was ecstatic. And then after that, I wanted a 30-pounder, and I spent years and years and years and years till I caught that 30-pounder. So for me growing up, they were really important milestones, and that PB meant a lot to me, breaking that PB, improving on that PB. PB meaning personal best, you know, not biggest carp or heaviest carp, you know, it's personal best. When I joined Nash and Kev let Reedy and I fish a church lake for the first time, that term PB really changed for me, because within that first 12 hours of fishing Kev's Lake, I'd caught a 48-pound common, a 44-pound leather, and numerous other big fish, big commons, big mirrors, high 30s and stuff. I'd obliterated that thing called PB, you know, by catching these huge carp. And ever since then, I've always looked at that term PB in a different way. I often have, not just kids, but more often than not, youngsters come up to me at a show or a shop day, or message me, or bump into me on the bank or whatever. And if I ask them, have you got any questions? Probably the most commonly asked question is, what is your PB? And I often tell them, you know, what I'm explaining now, how I spent years trying to improve on mine, but how now I'm at a point where I realise that if a youngster had access to, for example, a venue like the Church Lake, if they came to the Church Lake in the middle of May and they had a half decent knowledge of location, watercraft, rigs, baits, if they basically angled well, semi-well even if they just put a rod out in that lake, because of the venue and because of the sheer number of big carp that live in there, they're going to catch massive fish. You know, they might come again the following week and catch loads more massive fish, and then again the following week and catch loads more massive fish. They may well have only been carp fishing for 6 months prior to that, and already they've caught 10 40s, 250s, and countless 30-pounders. It doesn't make them phenomenal anglers, you know, just because of the weight of the fish they've caught, and it's something I'm really conscious of, you know. More so now, thinking a carp is a personal best capture for more reasons than just its weight. Moving on into later years, you know, in the last 5 years, for example, I've been really, really lucky to have caught some mega fish, some massive fish. My largest common, I had to pause there before I said personal best common. My largest common, you know, over 30 kilos. My largest mirror, over 30 kilos. Enormous fish. But when I really look back on those captures, maybe the common in Austria at the Social 2, you know, I did have to work very, very hard for that. But I've had to work a lot harder for other fish, and other carp that I've caught over my life have meant more to me than that big one. Back last year, I caught a particular mirror over 30 kilos. Again, I had to graft for it. I worked hard, I caught it, but I've caught fish much, much smaller that mean a lot more to me than either of those two captures. Here's an interesting one. Going back to why do we do it, what drives us to want to go out there and do it, you know, and whether when we do that they should count or not. In the office, we've got a board. It's basically the anglers' names, all the lads that work here, and then across the top there's £20, £25, £30, £35, £40. And for all of those different weight categories, the lads can achieve points. Points normally mean prizes, but in the case of our office anglers board, it just means the glory at the end of the year going, I won, I got more points than anyone else. And we instigated this into the office because it drove people to do more fishing, work harder in their angling, and basically be out there on the bank, you know, practicing what they preach, I suppose. And on that basis, it was very, very effective. It got people out there doing more angling. But the downside of it was, you know, and I speak on behalf of most of the lads that were sort of in the top 5, 6, you know, on that leaderboard, some of those times they would be going just to get those points, you know, and they weren't necessarily going for the right reasons. They would potentially go to a specific venue just because it was full of 20-pounders, just to clock up a load of points. Is that the right reason to be going fishing? It got to the point last year where we started putting rules in and stuff like, if you don't take a portrait photo, you don't get any points. You know, so it got to the point where the boys here were angling, which was initiated as a good thing, you know, to get more people fishing, but then it sort of, I saw it flip 180 on its head, and yeah, people were fishing for the wrong reasons. And, you know, people have said it to me before, and I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, you're just going fishing to get likes on Instagram, you know. Is that why people nowadays are going out there to just get likes, to just say, look at me, look how great I am, look at these fish I've caught. Should they count if that's the reason you're going, you know, or should we just be going fishing because it's what we love doing? Back to the fish, what about if the big ones were easy to catch anyway because they're big, you know, they've got to this size by eating lots of bait, therefore they're actually easier to catch. And then moving on to how credible something is deemed, you know, by what it is, what about koi and ghosties? You know, I know so many anglers and friends that categorically say they are wrong uns, mate. Koi, ghosties, ornamentals, whatever you want to call it, they're absolutely wrong uns. I find it quite ironic, really, that you get koi carp, spelled K-O-Y, and then you have the word coy, C-O-Y, which stands for pretense of shyness. That's interesting to me because throughout my entire life, I've always personally found catching a koi or a ghostie to be a lot trickier than catching, you know, a normal common or mirror, for example. They're usually the ones that hang back from the group or they're deeper in the lily beds or stuff. Certainly in my stalking anyway, they're the trickier ones to catch. But yeah, people will often say that, nah, not that big carrot, that's an absolute wrong one, or oh, ghosties, they're horrible, you know. For me, I absolutely love them all. And I often think to myself, if you had a venue, if you were fishing a venue, for example, and in it there was a 40-pound jet black common with a beautiful overslung mouth and that beautiful heart tail, but the poor thing got caught at least once a month. It was a proper mugfish, yeah, but it's 40 pounds and it's jet black. And in there was one orange koi. And at best, it would come out once a year. Sometimes it'd go a whole season or two without getting caught. Which one counts more? Is it the mugfish that might look really good on your Instagram page, for example, or is it the koi that so many people disregard as a fish that should count, even though that koi was so much more of a challenge to catch? Grass carp, they're another one. Loads of people I know, nah, grass carp, they're not real, they're wrong uns, they don't count. Personally, I love grass carp and I dream of the day of catching a true monster, you know, one so big that I can't lift it, I have to do water shots. Places like Italy, for example, they've got some phenomenally big grass carp and yeah, I'd love to catch one. To me, they absolutely do count. And then a really interesting one, Siamese carp. I spent many, many years having no appeal whatsoever to travel to Thailand to fish for these Siamese carp, just like, nah, not for me, you know, I'll stick to catching beautiful ones out of the river But when Martin Bowler asked me if I'd like to come, I agreed. It was reluctantly, I'll add, you know, it was more an opportunity to spend some time with Martin, who I hold in the highest regard. And if I'm really honest, more so with the hope that in the future, he might take me salmon fishing or to go and catch a big roach. Going to actual Thailand, it really didn't appeal to me. A, I didn't want to catch those type of carp, and B, it was the environment they lived in, these overstocked, muddy puddles, you know, just didn't float my boat. However, I went, and they say you should never judge a book by its cover, and this was never a truer example because not only did I love catching those carp, not only did Martin explain to me that they are actually the purest form of carp in the world, you know, all these fish we're fishing for have been interbred with different strains, you know, to get them to how we want them, going all the way back to the monks, for example, you know, with scaleless carp, so to speak. So yeah, you've got that element of, after listening to Martin, I felt I was fishing for something really pure. And then there's the environment. It was anything but a muddy puddle. Maybe it was overstocked, yeah, granted, but there's lots of places in England, for example, that are full of carp and overstocked. I walked away from that trip, like I say, really aware that try hard not to judge a book by its cover, Alan, until you've actually gone and experienced it yourself. And to be brutally honest, I can't wait to get back over there and experience some more Siamese carp fishing in Thailand, because it really was a mind-blowing experience. So on the topic of venues, just talked about Thailand, what about the bigger picture in terms of venues? Have you heard the saying before, it's okay not to pay? Or pay lake fish don't count. Just like identifying whether a carp is a right one or a wrong one, I also kind of struggle personally with venues, being able to decipher the difference between what is a pay lake and what is a public lake. What is a public lake? Is it a large expanse of water, open access, people are swimming in it, cycling around it, you know, it's there for the public to use, it just so happens there's also carp inside it. Are there not really any swims? Do the swims not have names? Has the venue not been stocked and it's just a natural stock of carp in there? Is that what a public lake is? I'm not too sure. Whereas the polar opposite, a pay lake, is that somewhere commercial, you pay money maybe by the day or even the hour to fish there. There's lots of other anglers, lots of swims, the swims have got names, the venue's potentially overstocked. Is that what a pay lake is? Like I say, I really don't know. It's very grey, this. Using some examples, Samir, love him to bits, big up Samir, bro. He will say till the day he dies, nah, don't fish pay lakes, bro, like, only fish public waters. And if you look back across Samir's angling, he has fished some phenomenal public waters and caught the most ridiculous amount of fish. But talking with Samir, I find it interesting that one of his fondest venues, Lac de Dare, which he will argue is a public lake, he also has on a number of occasions pre-booked swims there and paid to pre-book those swims. So I'm sorry, Samir, like those sort of sessions where you've paid to fish there and you've pre-booked a swim, to me that kind of falls more into the category of that's a pay lake. But he'll say, no, it's the Dare, it's a public water. It's just an interesting thing and it's an interesting thing for me anyway. And I know last year he actually did, with Claire, fish his first ever pay lake. A friend of his has got a venue in France. He went on his big journey, him and Claire are on this adventure, travelling across Europe, and one of the first venues they fished was a French pay lake type venue. I think Samir will be the first to admit it wasn't actually very easy. It was a challenge, in fact, but the pair of them caught some incredible fish. And most of all, they really enjoyed doing it. So where he's gone through his whole life saying, nah, don't fish pay lakes, bro, don't fish. He has now, and he enjoyed it, and maybe it is all about people just being more open-minded. Mark Pansar, another very good friend, phenomenal angler, Belgium, fished with him a few times, and he's exactly the same. Nah, won't fish pay lakes, only fish public waters, But I went and fished with Mark at what he described as a syndicate lake, a tiny little lake where anglers paid to fish there. They had a membership structure and stuff. And I was very lucky to catch a massive carp, from there. Mark's also caught these fish and he's still a member there. But in his eyes, he would never fish a pay lake. But you paid to fish there, Mark. It's a small venue with lots of big carp inside of it, Who's making these decisions? Another one, Jocelyn Dupree in France. Phenomenal angler, caught untold amount of big fish. Will claim that he's public lake angler only, destination H2O, these incredible French venues. Not now, not anymore. He's had a baby now. Congratulations, Jocelyn, big love. Now he's got a baby, all of a sudden it's all right to fish pay lakes. Just before Christmas, for example, he fished Ictus, very famous French pay lake, and caught enormous mirror, and the smile on his face when he caught that fish. So just because he's had a baby now, all of a sudden it's okay to start fishing pay lakes. And the pioneer of it all, the one and only, the legend, Gio. Gio kind of created this movement with the Monkey Climber magazine, super cool brand, incredible magazine, and some real profound, catchphrases, slogans that have really gripped anglers. One of those is that it's okay not to pay. He's kind of spearheaded that to a degree. But Ollie and I, we've actually fished 2 pay lakes with Gio. We had a lovely time fishing them together. One of them we didn't pay, but you did have to pay to be there. The other one, we actually paid. We paid €10 each to fish this pay lake water. Gio might look at it differently, but to me, it seems like it can sometimes be one rule for one rule for the other. Other examples, I fished a lake a couple of years ago with Jocelyn again, with Thierry, we filmed a film there. It was a public lake. It was on the Carp de Pêche. You know, I bought my yearly licence, it allowed me to fish there and hundreds of other venues. But when I arrived at this venue, it was like the ultimate pay lake in terms of the swims were so well trodden, there was steps going down to the water's edge, and it was very busy. You know, almost every swim was taken, anglers were lines going out everywhere. And I walked around this small public venue and I couldn't help but think, this feels so much more like a busy UK day ticket water than a public venue. Again, you know, where do you draw the line? Cassian, another example. I've done my fair share of fishing over in Europe on these big waters and stuff, and if I'm honest, when I went to Cassian that first time, I never thought it was going to be easy, but I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. I thought of Cassian as a big public lake with lots of fish in and very natural and stuff. But having fished there for 3 days, I found it incredibly difficult. Yeah, I was blessed to have caught a couple of fish, but the lads I was with, they also struggled. And that's because, if you take Cassian for example, it's been hammered, absolutely hammered over the years by some of the, if not the very best anglers across the world, you know, going there to catch carp 365 days of the year. So even though it's deemed as like the Mecca, Cassian, it kind of felt after my session there a lot more like a tricky, busy, pay lake type venue. Another example, Eurobanks 4, I think, we fished a venue that we called the Jungle Lake. Now, from the outside looking in, you guys that have watched that film, if you remember the Jungle Lake, it was like the jungle. There was no swims as such. It was just every snag left in the water, weedy, bays, islands and that. It was actually a pay lake, you know, you paid to fish there and stuff. So, yeah, it goes back to that, does it count? What's right, what's wrong? And there is no real answer to this. Garden pond types venues. I love a garden pond. I've even been known in years gone by when I've had ponds in my own garden growing up with mum and dad, I fished them. A whole man's up, I'll admit it. Little top section off a pole. I used to regularly catch my carp in my garden pond. I know moving down to Essex and understanding the setup here with regards to Kev's Lake, they had a dreadful stigma surrounding them that all Kev's fish were just pond fish. In fact, the decking just out here now, apparently, hearsay was, you could go out and you could tap the decking and all the fish would come to be fed. It's ludicrous, you know, and it isn't true. And if you take the church, for example, I've seen some of the country's best anglers go up there and struggle, you know, because at the end of the day, they're just carp. If it's not on, if the conditions aren't right, they can still be very, very tricky to catch. Red Mile would be another example. I was very lucky to have 2 days there. We exclusively booked the venue. There was no one else fishing other than myself. You know, is that fair? Should they count those fish because I'd booked the venue exclusively? And it leads on to reserving swims, roping swims off, you know, just so an angler can get in there to potentially do a magazine feature or film. I've never done it myself. I've never had a piece of water roped off or a swim blocked, you know, waiting for my arrival. But plenty of people do. Going back to the new lake, you know, I touched on it earlier with regards to that carp I caught at Christmas. When we fished there the first time, Ollie and I, after the end of Eurobank 6, Ollie caught one of the most incredible carp, you know, the dinosaur. Phenomenal fish, and it actually beat his PB at the time. But I know Ollie never really felt it counted. You know, he never wanted to count it as a PB breaker, just because of the situation and the scenario, i.e. no one had fished the lake before. What about poached fish? What about fishing in out of bounds areas? You know, I'm probably as guilty as that as anyone. Using an extra snide rod, using a barbed hook when actually it's barbless, fishing nights when you're not allowed to do nights, you know. Surely if I've broke rules in order to catch a fish, or any of you guys for that matter, should they count? Should they not? You know I break a lot of rules, but certain people from other companies, they seem to think that I glamorise that or I big it up and stuff. I really don't, or it's never intended like that. I do that, I fish in the out of bounds, I'll fish an extra rod, I do it because I love fishing, I just love fishing and I want to catch. You know, it's probably those same people that think what I'm doing is really wrong are the same people that would go and get a swim roped off at linear, for example, you know, have it shut down for a week maybe before an angler gets in there. I would never disregard their capture. I know why they do that. They're doing it because they're there to do a job, they've got a film to make and stuff. A lot of this boils down to other people's opinions and maybe not your own about what should and shouldn't count or not. And what about catching one on someone else's rod? I know personally over the years I've aided and assisted with hundreds of people catching a carp, to the point where, yeah, I'll have tied the rig, put the bait on, prepared the bait, cast it, put it on the bite alarm, set the bob in, takes occurred, I've probably struck the take, and all I've done is hand them the rod to reel it in. More often than not, it would have been with a barbed hook, so there was little doubt that it was going to fall off, so all they've actually done is reel a carp in. But that doesn't mean that at the time I didn't feel it was their carp, you know. I shared the moment with them, celebrated it, took the picture of them holding that fish, and to me, that's their carp. It wasn't my carp. None more so than an example with Chloe, again, fishing up on the Church Lake. She'd come up with me to do a session. She caught 3 fantastic fish, completely unaided. She tied the rig herself, she'd put the bait on, she'd cast them out, she'd baited over the top with the spot and stuff. And yeah, she caught 3 really nice carp. We had a barbecue, and at the end of the evening, she said, you know what, I'm done now, Al. Anything that happens through the night, they're your fish. And nothing did happen. It passed very, very quietly until the morning. The sun was coming up, and we had a take. I was out on the rod. She was very difficult to get up. She loves her sleep. And a lot of kicking and shouting. Eventually, I managed to get her up, but the battle was almost done, you know. I ended up handing her the rod, half a dozen more turns on the reel, little bit of side strain, and it went over the net cord. And it turned out to be the 4x4, you know, one of the biggest fish in the lake, and a fish that I'd not caught and still haven't caught to this day. One I'd really love to catch. At the time, I could have very easily said, babe, let me have that one, I want the picture with that. But it don't work like that. It was her carp, she caught it, you know, because of that work beforehand and stuff. An example where it's kind of been on the other foot, every year I love to go and have a trip to Vienna, go and see my boys, go and see Bastel, Nick, Flo, Dom and stuff. And a couple of winters ago, maybe 3 winters ago, I tipped up, got collected from the airport and taken to a venue where the lads were already fishing. On arrival, I got my sawn-offs out, prepared my rig, got my citrus pop-up on, and I went out in a boat on my own, unaided, and I placed a couple of rods. When I came back, the boys said, the next take's yours out, you know. And we went into a process of sharing takes, you know, something I love doing, and I'll come back to in a minute. The next take occurred, and it turned out to be the biggest fish in the lake, a huge common. But I hadn't actually placed that rod, I hadn't actually tied that rig. But to me, I still caught that carp. The lads wanted me to catch that carp. We shared the moment together and stuff. But should that carp really count as mine? You know, how much does that mean to me? And yeah, touching on that sharing takes, I absolutely love doing it, you know, going all the way back to an amazing time with Joris from Belgium when he came over to England. We had a really good session on St. John's on linear, sharing takes. He went on to catch the box common. I've done it with Kev a lot over the years, fishing on the pit, for example, where it was a strict take for take for take for take. We both worked together, it was teamwork. And also with Ollie, you know, me and Ollie love going fishing in that style where before the session you say, yeah, let's do it, let's share takes, take for take. It can be a really enjoyable way of doing it. But when a carp's caught, who should have the photo? Should we both get the photo of the fish? It doesn't work like that, you know. What about if they only counted if you had absolutely no assistance whatsoever? And by that I mean, what about if you had to build your own rods? You had to go and source hook links, you had to tie your own rigs, roll your own bait. You know, what about if you had no prior knowledge to the venue? Would they count then when you had no assistance? What about time? Is it they don't count because an angler has more time than the other person? You know, you hear it all the time. Excuse the pun. He's full time, you know, he's just baiting and waiting, he's boring them out. But those people that are in that situation, those full-time anglers, they've orchestrated their life in such a way to be able to do that, you know. More often than not, they've worked very, very hard to be in that position. Or and or they've made huge sacrifices, maybe monetary sacrifices, sacrifices with family and stuff, just in order for them to be out there and fish a lot. Tactics, zig rig fish don't count, floater fishing don't count, chucking a ball of maggots at a carp 100 times and waiting for it to eventually suck it in don't count. Again, it just depends on that moment, you know, whether you feel they count or not. Some people, I believe, feel that they don't count unless you create a feeding situation, unless you've crushed and smashed some swan mussel shells and then taken a tiger nut and peeled it and placed it, and then in the background there's a steaming kettle with autumn leaves. They're the only carp that count, you know. Foul looking. Have you ever counted one that you foul hooked? Maybe it was just caught outside of the mouth. I remember a year or so ago, a horrific incident when Dennis, big ups Dennis, he came over from Hungary and he fished on a lake with me, and he ended up hooking a big fish, landing it, and sadly it was hooked in the peck, and he let that fish swim off, and he nearly was in tears, you know. Not only had he foul hooked it, he'd used a barbed hook when it was a barbless rule. Yeah, should it count, shouldn't it count? Talking to the zigging again, I heard a really interesting story about catfish. This really made me think a lot, because have you ever caught a catfish on a zig rig? I actually haven't, but I hear an awful lot do, an awful lot. And I was speaking to a chap at Bluebell who told me that they're not actually, and it makes a lot of sense, coming up into 12 foot of water and taking a tiny little bit of black foam. What's actually happening is they're swimming along the bottom or a foot or so up off the bottom, like catfish normally do, and because of their great big long whiskers, they're hitting one of these carp anglers' zig rigs. They're carrying on swimming, not feeling it whatsoever. It's pulling the zig rig down to the point that it catches in the side of its mouth. All these anglers are catching these catfish on these zigs and going, yeah, look what I caught. And actually, you could argue that they've been foul hooked. I don't know, but it was a really interesting way that this guy put it to me. So there you have it. To conclude, my history. Growing up, I just went fishing and I loved it. It didn't really matter whether they counted or not. I did it because I loved it. Then I got influenced and pushed in a direction to want to catch a specific type of carp. And nowadays, I don't care anymore. I really don't care. Yes, everyone can have an opinion, but it's how you deliver that opinion to other people. If you go back to the Tom and the big rig example, that's disgusting, you know, giving people death threats and stuff. I think we should be able to go out there, enjoy our fishing. The carp mean what they mean to us as individuals. Only you know how much it means to you, how much it should count. How hard did you have to work for it? How tricky was the venue? It's a very personal thing. And I know even in recent times, people like Jim, keep it real Jim Shelley, he's even toyed with the idea himself of venturing into Europe to go and do some fishing. They count to you. Go out there, enjoy it, do it because you love it. Don't disregard other people's captures. For me, I absolutely love them all. Big, small, fat, thin, black, orange, pale, loads of scales. Go and enjoy it. That's the end of episode 1 on what counts. Episode number 2, I'm going to be getting a lot more fishing based, a lot more technical, and chatting to you guys about all my thoughts regarding location, watercraft, and how I go about tracking those fish down when I go on a session. Be safe, guys. Big love. Catch you later.